reminder that you have 10 days left to vote in the Pluribus Unum Awards. All it takes is a simple click at the link provided to vote for your favorite episodes in the past 5 years. Please vote too.
Hello and welcome to Pluribus Unum's Fireside Chats. Not as FDRs, but hey, it's something. Housekeeping, as that little thing at the beginning said, vote in the poll. Vote in the poll that I put. Vote in the EPU Awards now. Do it now. I know you have Google accounts, everybody. I know you have Google accounts. You wouldn't be subscribed if you didn't have Google accounts. Vote now. 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 I didn't spend all that time making that Google form so I could be ignored yet again. I ask you for very, very, very small, simple tasks, yet I get ignored. Vote now. 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 This is going to be the beginning of every section of every podcast until the day of, because apparently you don't look at community posts, you don't look at the original post, you don't look at the Twitter, you don't look at the Discord, so I mean, I'm trying to do all the other ways. This is the only way I can do it. Vote, 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 now, now, now. Vote now, 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 vote now. In the description, you can look at the feed. It's right there. I'll spam it to you all more. If you think I'm going crazy, yes, you bet your ass I am. Vote now, 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 vote now. Just to be clear, I want you all to vote now. Okie dokie? Now with that out of the way, let's get right into the news. First, the Israeli parliament has pushed for a bill that criminalizes, quote, the consumption of terrorist materials. Now, on paper, that sounds good, but if you remember, Israel's a little bit loose on what is defined as terrorist. So, this bill has been condemned by a lot of human rights groups because it essentially is just trying to make free speech a thing of the past in Israel, if it ever was a thing at all. And the bill has already been shown, even though literally just passed, it's been put into effect almost immediately because there was a video that was immediately spreading around social media. I think it was a little bit before this news became prevalent worldwide that a Palestinian woman was being arrested for reading so-called terrorist materials. And other forms of censorship have been going on in Israel as well, where a former member of the Knesset, Mohammed Barakeh, was detained after organizing a pro-Gazan protest, under the claim that this protest would incite public unrest within Israel. You know, a thing a protest is supposed to freaking do. So there's not much else I can say about the story now, because, Israel is just doing objectively evil things, and due to the fact that the West is so cucked by them, they're just going to go ahead and go along with it. Now, on the thread of terrorism or extremism, there is actually a good thing that has been going on in this field, because Germany is actually trying to start doing a little bit of goodness, because Germany has designated an AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland party, has found an affiliate of the Saxony-Anhalt. It's the second state affiliate of the German AfD party, being labeled as an extremist group. The first one being one of a neighboring province called Thuringia. Now, we've talked a little about this in the past, but for those who don't remember, the AfD is basically a neo-Nazi party in Germany, but without actually being a neo-Nazi party. They're basically of the same cut of other far-right political parties, UKIP. I guess UKIP is literally the best example I could use. The National Rally, I guess Meloni's party, where it's they have a connection to fascism within those countries, but they're just enough removed that when you call them fascist, they go like, oh, what about me? I know fascist. No. And due to that fact, many of these parties are able to get away with it, as opposed to the literal, like, neo-Nazi, neo-fascist parties that are not able to get away with it. Like, for example, like, the closest one that was to an actual neo-fascist party was Meloni's party in Italy, and that's because, like, she literally takes the iconography of a fascist party in Italy. Like, but it's like, it was founded by people who left that party and reformed it to be more broadly like a right-wing populist type. But in Germany, the AfD's been a little bit of a controversial element, because the AfD, they're not necessarily, like, again, they're basically, like, close to the, like, right-wing populist type element, but they've always been just good enough to sneak on by, as opposed to, like, the literal Nazi iconography that's banned in Germany. But despite this fact, they are still really heavily ostracized within Germany, with basically no party even remotely indicating that they would even join an alliance with them. However, there's been a bit of a problem, because the AfD has started changing their rhetoric to be a bit more anti-democratic and more blatantly fascist. And around the same time, they also have begun to get a rise in the polls. Like, the polls, as of, like, 2023, like, around the end of April, they started shooting up drastically in the polls, bypassing both the Green Party and the Social Democrats, becoming the second largest polling party in Germany at the moment. The most recent poll has been conducted from November 3rd to the 6th. It has the Christian Democrats at 29.5 points, the AfD with 22 points, and I mean, that's just the big worrisome, which has led to people being sort of put in this bind, because now it's like, what the heck do they do now? Because now, due to this, many people have been openly calling for the abolition of the AfD, or like censorship, like banning or whatever, which has led to some people to have some worries, because it's like, if they ban the AfD, what happens next? Will the AfD supporters get mad or whatever else? And the short answer is yes, they need to ban the AfD. 100%, like, no question about it. They need to ban the AfD, like now, ASAP now. I mean, they should have banned the AfD almost immediately, but, you know, better late than never, I guess. Anyway, speaking of better late than never, we have the SAG-AFTRA strike, because they have finally approved a deal to end their historic strike. And as we did with the writer's strike, we're going to read some of the demands of their SAG-AFTRA strike. Okay, so a streaming participation bonus, above pattern minimum compensation increases, substantial increase for pension and health caps, pay increases for background actors, contract provisions protecting diverse communities, major provisions for consent and compensation from artificial intelligence, saying right here, they secured informed consent and fair compensation for, like, the creation and use of digital replicas of performers and background actors. Basically, they'll get paid the same amount whether they actually show up to work or if they use an AI model, and it outright bans the use of AI for background characters. Also stating that sets must have proper hair and makeup services for all performers, including those with diverse and textured hair and complexions, and requires for intimacy coordinators present for scenes that involve nudity or stimulated sex. Basically, W's all around, and W's all around anyways, because that means I can probably add the SAG-AFTRA strike to my writer's strike video. Oh boy, that's gonna be cool. If I can figure out how to work it in. I do have a way I can work it in, but I don't know necessarily if I can. But I'll figure out if I can or not. Either way, you will get a video on the writer's strike anyways. Anyways, the next story is a very, very controversial element that happened, but bears obviously saying. Rashida Tlaib was recently censured in the United States House of Representatives. Now, for those who don't know what a censure in the United States House of Representatives is, it's basically when they wag their fingers and go. It's different from a reprimand, which I think is a lesser sentence, and different from an expulsion, where things are very different. Censuring is really weird, because censuring in the United States House of Representatives can be very, very different. Like, for example, on one end, you have people who engage in unparliamentary language, which probably just means they swore or something. You have the House censuring Adam Schiff for basically saying that Russia and Trump had collusion. You had Paul Gosar, who was censured because he posted a video of him attacking Joe Biden and AOC. You had Gary Studs and Daniel Crane, who were censured for engaging in sex with 17-year-olds. And now we have Rashida Tlaib, who was censured for saying genocide bad. The worst crime of them all, apparently. Now, you see, there were actually two bills to censure. One was made by Marjorie Taylor Greene, and then the other one was made by some other representative that I don't give a fuck about. And apparently, the former version was worse, or whatever, but this version was okay enough to get people to vote for it. But the thing was, like, we knew that it was probably going to pass regardless. Like, if it made it through, like, after the initial thing, we knew that it would probably pass regardless. But the real question was, who would vote for it? And like it seemed to be it almost looked like a party line vote. 234 yeah, 188 nays. And one thing that was shocking was that 4 Republicans voted nay. They don't get credit for anything because they didn't give a shit about the actual Palestinian issue. But the one thing that has been very abundantly like going around was the fact that 22 Democrats voted yeah. Steve Cohen, Jim Costa, Angie Craig, Don Davis, Louis Frankel, Jared Golden, Dan Goldman, Josh Gothmeier, George Landsman, Susie Lee, Kathy Manning, Jared Moskowitz, Wiley Nickel, Chris Pappas, Marie Perez, Pat Ryan, Brad Schneider, Kim Schreier, Darren Soto, Richie Torres, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and Frederica Wilson. And all I have to say is primary. All of them. I don't give a fuck about any of them. And I think I want to make this one abundantly clear. I want everybody, like, when we attack them, I want us to do something interesting. Because Steve Cohen's got the perfect way to attack. Bring up the fact that for some reason, a deep blue area that has a large black population has been nominated and supported by a white guy the entire time. Anyway, speaking of white guys, Joe Manchin has decided that he will not run for re-election. Best decision that Joe Manchin has ever made in his career. The fact of the matter is, nothing about this race changed, but we're still getting some people who are somehow trying to make this into another thing where it's like, and we'll get into a little bit about this in the main topic, but like, this is always the trend. Everything that happens is bad for the Democrats. Apparently, like, literally everything that happens is bad for the Democrats. Joe Manchin not running for re-election changed literally nothing. The race was guaranteed to go red. Manchin staying in only gave them a slight potential to keep it. But even then, it was very unlikely that was going to happen. But due to that very slight, tiny edge, a lot of polling aggregate sites put this race into toss-up. But since Manchin has bowed out, now all of a sudden they're finally labeling it as solid R, which is the blah blah blah. It's like, no, I don't. The race was guaranteed to go red regardless. The fact of the matter is, I genuinely don't care about Manchin. I genuinely do not care. Even if he stayed in the race, it wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't change anything because Manchin was essentially a Republican. He goaded and aided and abetted Republicans throughout the entirety of his, tenure, and yet reactionaries are somehow trying to paint Manchin as oh yeah, by Manchin, you basically sucked Biden off the entirety of his tenure. It's what are you talking about? He literally did not do that. This is catharsis for a lot of reasons, and one of the biggest reasons was the last race, everybody was saying, you need to vote Manchin. You need to support Manchin. You need to critically support Manchin. You guys need to support Manchin because at the end of the day, he's the only Democrat who can win this seat. He's the only one who can win this seat, and he needs to do all these things to get elected. Now he's not running for re-election, so it's what was the point? What was the point? People like Manchin and Sinema are not useful to Democrats whatsoever. Those races go red. Those races remain with those two in the seats. That ain't changing nothing. And I don't give a fuck about the thing where it's he's going on a nationwide campaign tour. I don't care. Completely irrelevant and bullshit whatsoever. Not really relevant. I just want Manchin to be gone forever. One shining hope is that there is a Democratic challenger who was challenging Manchin, but now is going to be running solo, Zachary Shrewsbury, which I immediately endorsed now. But again, like, seats going red, so it's like, don't give him money. You just be real, don't give him money. Speaking of people to not give money to, oh boy, big news dropped. The United States presidential election has gotten a new challenger. Actually, scratch that. They got an old challenger. Because two-time presidential nominee Jill Stein has announced that she will be running for the Green Party a third time. If you guys remember, Jill Stein was the one who radicalized me away from the Democratic Party. So, is it finally time for me to support Jill Stein and finally be able to cast my ballot for her? Fuck no. Genuinely, no. No. I am not supporting Jill Stein's 2024 bid. You should not support Jill Stein's 2024 bid. Nobody should be supporting Jill Stein's 2024 bid. I plan to go fully in depth on this later, but the TLDR, Project 2025, Project 2025, Project 2025, Project 2025, Project 2025, that is literally all you need. Project 2025 is on the ballot in 2024. The GOP is openly running on this. They learned their mistakes from 2020. They're not trying to make those same mistakes again. They want to fill the fucking, executive branch filled with Trump stooges, give him basically unilateral control of many independent agencies in the US government. And that's ignoring all of the problems with the Green Party and Jill Stein. And the fact of the matter is, I don't care about any of, she was arrested. No. I don't believe in any of that bullshit. I don't believe in that. And I don't care if she's a good faith actor. I don't care. It's irrelevant. 2024, you got two options. Biden or Trump. You have two options in 2024. Aiding and abetting fascist takeover of the United States or stopping it. And you need to understand very abundantly clear, if I am the person saying this, then it should be heeded. Anyway, speaking of elections, let's move on to the main topic of this video. We have reached the end of the 2023 elections, at least in the United States. I'm pretty sure there are other countries that still have elections going on. But the USA has finally ended its election process for this year. The off years. The elections that very few people pay attention to. In this episode, we're going to be going over a decent number of elections, like big W's or L's during this election. There wasn't really that much interesting for this election outside of general, Dem versus Republican, but this is interesting to talk about for those who really need to understand how things, especially considering, this is the final test before 2024. Voting for 2024 isn't that far away. It's November now. The voting begins in January because New Hampshire refuses to move their election. So anyways, let's just get into some of the election results that happened. First one is one that is not really surprising at all. Rhode Island. Gabe Amo has officially won his seat in Congress. Good on him. I wish it was Aaron Rugenberg, but good on Gabe for actually managing to pull through. Mississippi. Now, Mississippi was interesting because Dems, at least on Twitter, were trying to make Mississippi an upset. Unsurprisingly, it did not work. But it was potentially possible. It wasn't necessarily that improbable for Mississippi to potentially flip. Even with them spreading blatant misinformation to try and get them in, with people literally trying to just spread fake videos and tweets of Trump supporting Presley and Tate Reeves, the Republican incumbent, being endorsed by Obama. The other governor's race that was up for grabs was Kentucky. Well, it wasn't up for grabs because it was an incumbent running, Andy Beshear, who won very handily. Not all surprising. You could have said it for many different reasons. Andy Beshear's father was very popular. Andy Beshear himself has been relatively popular. Andy Beshear's been able to get a lot of crossover votes. Daniel Cameron was not really that good of a candidate. But the real answer is very obvious. Beshear, Cameron, look at the two. Kentucky ain't voting for someone like Cameron no time soon. In before the comments go, actually, Kentucky elected a black official in this year. Guys, chill. I'm making fun of white rednecks. What's the problem? Speaking of, how do you circumcise a redneck? You kick your sister in the jaw. Next, Virginia. Democrats retained the state Senate and managed to win the state House. One major L came from Susanna Gibson, a race that I got very passionate about for very big reasons. So basically, what happened was Susanna Gibson was a Democratic state candidate in this district, and a video was leaked by Republicans, which was a video of her and her husband engaging in sex acts. It wasn't OnlyFans, it was like a Chatterbait thing where she was basically doing sex work with her husband, and then Republicans were going around saying doing the typical spiel of being like, oh, how dare she? And this news statement made it to the website Our Campaigns, of which I'm a member, and extremely fascist people on Our Campaigns. When I say fascist people, I mean one of them is literally just blatantly a fascist, Hikikomori Blitzkrieg. He's literally just point blank a fascist. Like, literally, if you look up any far-right politician on there and then click the race that they're on, Hikikomori is usually, right there endorsing them. The dude is so far in, literal fascism territory that he literally said, he admitted to this. He went to the site and then said that he wanted to vote for a fringe candidate specifically so that he can prevent a woman of color from even getting second place in his own city's mayoral race. He was going crazy, and then some fucking guy who's clearly going on some far right rabbit hole, Brenton CO, who's basically doing the thing where it's oh well, I'm just principally centrist, but then it's just by the way, trans people are bad and icky and gross. So basically these two were shaming Susanna Gibson. And I immediately replied, oh, how dare she? A woman have sex with her fucking husband. How dare she? And Brent was like, oh, she's participating in the sex trade. That's bad, and it degrades women, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, fucking troglodyte. You fucking absolute troglodyte. She is the one getting all the benefits from this interaction. She posted the videos. She gets the money from the videos. She gets to have sex with the man she married. I genuinely do not understand the problem of this situation that I bring up on the same token, how the GOP literally endorses fucking rapists and pedophiles on the top of their ticket. And then he was like, oh no, you see, no, it's bad when they do it too, and when the Democrats do it. It's what do you mean when the Democrats do it? What do you mean fucking when the Democrats do it? Susan Gibson is not when the Democrats do it. He was literally saying, it's bad when Trump does his sex things, and it's bad when Susanna Gibson does them. It's these are not comparable. Trump has been accused of raping 12-year-olds. The accusations levied at Susanna Gibson is she had sex with her husband. Wow, I thought the Democrats were supposed to be the party of anti-traditional values, but I guess the GOP just really hates the fact that a woman had sex with her fucking husband. Brent going, she's participating in the sex trade. It's well, first of all, the term sex trade doesn't have an actual definition. When you look up the term sex trade, you immediately get sex trafficking, which is not what is happening. You see, the problem with prostitution and sex trafficking is the non-consent on the woman's part. Meanwhile, what Susanna Gibson is doing is she is engaging in control of her own body and her own decisions and is reaping all the benefits from this interaction. The reason why prostitution is bad is not because a woman is selling her body for money. The problem comes from socioeconomic reasons as to why a woman would do that, or force that is coming on a woman to do that. Like a woman getting kidnapped and then being forced to sell her body for money that will only go to her pimp. Meanwhile, Susanna Gibson faces none of the issues of that because not only is, again, she reaping the benefits of the situation, who gets the money her, but also she's not being forced to do it because Susanna Gibson is a fucking doctor. She's not struggling for cash to do this. And I got rightfully mad because I was just like, this is just blatant misogyny. Like, you're literally just being sexist to her. You're saying she can't have her own bodily fucking autonomy. And yeah, since the people in her district were like fucking brain dead, they didn't elect her. And another reason why her race was kind of fun, because conservatives on Twitter were like going fucking apeshit over her and be like, they're basically borderline saying they'd, do the big you know what if she won, which really mad she didn't win now. And another thing that was interesting for the Virginia races is that they actually managed to get their first trans state senator. And I think this person is the first trans state senator in the entirety of the South. Too bad it's Danica Roem, who objectively fucking sucks and should not be getting any of your support in the future. So, let me just reiterate this point because this is a thing that kind of came up a little bit during before, but let me explain. So, Danica Roem, she got notoriety for being the first trans House of Delegates member in Virginia, but she kind of started losing her spark when she introduced a bill in the Virginia House of Delegates called HB 1722, which allowed for applied behavioral analysis to be brought into public schools in Virginia. Applied behavioral analysis, or as it's also been called, behavioral engineering, definitely a good sign, is psychological intervention that applies approaches based upon principles of respondent and operant conditioning to change behavior of social significance. Which, for those of you who don't know, basically means they take people who act a certain way and try to change them to act a different way. Usually for people who are on the autism spectrum. Basically telling them, hey, can you guys stop acting autistic, dude? Come on, dude. And much like a different form of therapy, applied behavioral analysis sometimes uses electroshock therapy to make people act a certain way. So, very much a lot of people interpret applied behavioral analysis as basically being conversion therapy for people with autism. And when people brought this attention to Danica Roem on Twitter, Danica responded in a very stupid way, literally saying, and I quote, "This is absolutely not how to go about raising concerns about a bill my team and I worked with so many stakeholders to develop, let alone mischaracterize its intent. Sending an email to my office and asking to set up time to talk to me would have been a demonstration of good faith." And it's like, what the fuck are you talking about? Your whole brand when you fucking ran for office was that you were like this new hip young politician and that you were easy to reach on Twitter. So of course this would be the way that you would be reached out to. And so yeah, ever since then I'm just like, fuck Danica Roem. I don't give a shit about her. Anyways, next thing. This one's not about candidates. This one's about referendums. The first referendum was one in Maine that said that there was going to be a statewide run thing, and unfortunately it didn't end up passing. Very tragic. But Ohio is where we got bigger W's. Abortion and legal weed referendums passed the state handily, and many people were celebrating immediately, happy whatsoever. But also, I should mention, the Ohio representatives are immediately pushing for a bill to limit how the Supreme Court of Ohio understands what abortion is, basically already agreeing that this new thing cannot overturn whatever draconian laws they have already passed. And this is why you guys need to fucking vote for politicians and not rely purely on referendums, because if you vote for a referendum and your politicians in your area are not friendly to the results of that referendum, they'll literally just flat out ignore it. North Dakota voted for legal weed, remember that? Or was it South Dakota? Either way, the governor literally just said, fuck that, I don't care. But this last section is going to be a quick one, but it's also one that is interesting. It's, how did the left do? Well, I don't necessarily know how well the left did a lot of things, but there are some W's I could say. For starters, Philadelphia elected a new member that is a member of the Working Families Party. They already had a different Working Families Party member, Kendra Brooks, on the council, but also they elected another one. Congratulations! Down here in North Carolina, a progressive organization called Down Home North Carolina. It's a smaller progressive organization purely in North Carolina, usually focused on African American issues, but basically like broadly progressive organization, managed to win 7 seats in various nonpartisan races. And in the Durham City Council race, a DSA member by the name of Nate Baker managed to win. Speaking of DSA, at least 13 DSA-endorsed candidates managed to win in their recent elections. And there are a couple that, even if they didn't win, they got really, really close to winning. And one big W is that the fascist group Moms for Liberty failed massively. They endorsed 13 candidates, and only, one managed to win. And apparently, a bunch of other, moderate to liberal type, figures in state, school board races did manage to win. Now, what does this mean for 2024? Well, for starters, it means one thing for 2024. We have one less candidate because a man by the name of Glenn Youngkin, the incumbent governor of Virginia, was originally planning to use these races as a springboard. He was going to springboard a ton of right-wing legislation and also would springboard himself into the 2024 presidential election as a last-ditch anti-Trump candidate. But due to the massive failure that this race had, he's just not able to do so. And he's basically already concluded, he didn't even do a formal announcement to not, to withdraw from the race. He was literally just yeah. But what about the Democrats? What does this mean for them? Well, for starters, I guess I'll bring back the narrative that I was going to mention before. There's this weird narrative almost immediately. Every time we see, every day we go to the news media, we see, or go to the progressives online, we immediately see this. Democrats are doomed in 2024. That's what everybody seems to think. Democrats are just doomed for 2024. Ignoring literally every single thing that has been going on to indicate that the Democrats are not doomed for 2024. If I had to say anything right now, I would say they might be good for at the very least the presidential race. The Senate can be so-so, and the House, the gerrymandering isn't necessarily helping, but there's still a potential chance. But realistically, House is probably staying red. Senate might be, I've been looking over the Senate races again. I sadly see basically a 50-50 split again. The presidential race, I don't necessarily know how well, but I think it's still in Biden's camp for now. Now, we can get into a lot of factors as to why people might think differently or might think the same, but let's just go over some things. For starters, Biden's polls are going down. But wait, guys, I thought the hip new thing was to say don't trust the polls. Oh, okay, I guess it only works when it's for a candidate that you like. When Bernie's down in the polls, don't trust the polls. When Tulsi's down in the polls, don't trust the polls. When Trump's down in the polls, don't trust the polls. But when the candidate you don't like is not doing well in the polls, all of a sudden it's yes, the polls are right, 100% correct all the time. Look, presidential polls have always had a hit or miss attitude regarding them. For example, polls are always going to be of a small demographic that don't necessarily reflect a majority of the country. Unless the poll would literally have to be every single American telling everybody how they would vote for it to be even remotely accurate. Certain demographics will be overpolled, certain demographics will be underpolled, and some people are just not necessarily paying attention enough to give accurate results of the polls. That part we might be putting a pin in for later, but the fact of the matter is polls are not 100%, and we need to understand that when we look at polls. Polls are good for looking and paying attention to see how your candidate does well in certain demographics and such, but don't take polls to heart. The next thing is that many people are worried because Biden seems to be losing support in some prime demographics. Young people and Arab/Muslims. I can only speak to the former, but the fact of the matter is, young people hate Biden. They just openly hate Biden. They hated Biden last time, and they hate Biden this time. Yet last time, remember, they openly stated they hated him. He was stupid. He was a geriatric piece of shit. He was racist, segregationist, rapist, whatever. Like, they were saying everything about him. Yet young people still turned out to vote for him. I realistically think that the same thing is probably going to happen for 2024. Young voters are probably going to just say they don't like him, and then when push comes to shove, they'll just vote for him when the time comes. And this one is purely speculation, but like, for the Israel-Palestine situation with Muslims and Arabs, while Dems are not doing good on the Israel-Palestine issue, the GOP is doing far fucking worse. Like, I mean, the day that some people were complaining, like, oh, Joe Biden is doing bad with Arab voters and he's losing support, that same day, Trump literally made a speech where he was saying how he would ban Arabs from entering the country should he become president. You think that's not going to play a factor in the upcoming race? This isn't like a Trump trade deal situation where Trump literally campaigned as if he was better on the issue. Trump is campaigning as if he is worse on the issue, because he is. The next factor that I use to basically remove any worry of the situation is 2024 is more than likely going to be the 7th presidential rematch in U.S. history. We haven't had that many presidential rematches, but there are things that have happened before. So let's go over some of them. First, the first one that ever happened was the first 3 races, the second and third race, Adams and Jefferson. Basically what happened is Adams sucked, and then Jefferson was able to beat him a second time. The next one was John Quincy Adams versus Andrew Jackson. Now, John Quincy Adams managed to win the first time due to the deal that he made with Henry Clay. Then, second time, when Henry Clay was not a factor in the race, he was able to lose. Had the situation not had Clay initially, or if it was decided via the popular vote, Jackson would have won both times. The next one was Burren v. William Henry Harrison. Now, William Henry Harrison was one of 4 Whigs running. So again, that situation was a little different than a normal presidential race. The first one that starts to seem familiar is Cleveland versus Benjamin Harrison. Now, this one's a little different than that because of the third round of this, but let me explain. We all know the story. Grover Cleveland ran for president, everybody loved him, but he then started sucking. So then they replaced him with Benjamin Harrison. Benjamin Harrison was seen as oh yeah, he's so cool, we're going to get rid of Cleveland, we're going to do something different. But then Harrison ended up sucking. So then what ended up happening is the third time around, Cleveland ran against Harrison again. And they said, screw it. So Harrison was kicked out and Cleveland was put in. Another interesting thing was that the race also had, I think this was the one with James B. Weaver in it. So there was a little bit of an issue with that regard as well. But the next one is one that is very much familiar territory. William McKinley versus William Jennings Bryan. 2 rounds. Both basically just the only candidates in the race. McKinley won both times. Then the latest rematches were the rematches between Ike Eisenhower and Adlai Stevenson. Again, hold. As the decade has changed and as the generation has changed, we are in a generation where it's it's been holding. Though granted, we are still, that technically is, I guess, a generation away. The first couple of eras of the country, we were they were prone to flip. But then, in the 1900s, they were prone to hold. So maybe you might say 2000s, maybe it's a prone to flip again. I don't know. But I'm just saying it's a lot more likely that it might hold than flip, but it's not necessarily improbable. But this one is one where I'm actually going to have to give the slight worry for people who don't like Trump. Because we need to acknowledge this. There is a fact that I did read on Twitter that I was oh, well, that's something I didn't think about, but yeah, it is a factor, where it explains, yeah, but, you ever notice, everybody says, Democrats are doing terrible, everybody hates them, the polls say that Democrats are doing bad, and blah, blah, blah. They say all this stuff, but then when you look at every single race that happened in, 2022 and 2024, Democrats overwhelmingly won. That's a big disconnect. Why is that? And people pointed out this fact because the people who were paying attention to these races, 2022 and 2023, those are the people that are very, 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 very politically active. Very, 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 very ideological. More than likely college educated, but at the very least high school educated at the very least. People that are generally paying attention to what's going on. And unfortunately, those aren't the only people that are going to be voting in 2024. 2024 is going to have people who don't necessarily pay attention to politics as closely. People who don't necessarily have that much of a political ideology. People that are generally fucking stupid. People with bonobo brains. Yeah, people with bonobo brains are going to be the ones who are going to be helping vote in the 2024 election. And those people are fucking stupid. So hopefully we get smart people, enough smart people to let the bonobo brains not factor into the presidential race. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, and click that bell to notify when a future video mic comes out. And if you're interested in more content from me, you can go to my website, follow me on Twitter, join my Discord, or consider supporting me on Patreon.